Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to a viewer replay courtesy of Red Star 69GR here in the T25/2. Now I'm convinced, I was convinced that I'd shown this, multiple times on the channel before, but as it turns out I've only managed to turn up one replay of mine from like 2013. And it's a bit weird because I like this machine. It's been a long time since I played through this machine, but it's a very capable, solid tier 7 tank destroyer. In fact, it's one of those tanks that, it's on the tank destroyer line, but it almost plays like a medium tank. It's just kind of good enough in every respect. And although none of the stats are particularly impressive or spectacular, it's just a good overall package. So you've got a 90mm gun with not much more penetration than the Hellcat. I think that's one of the things that makes it not look that impressive, is that it's only 10 extra average pen over what the Hellcat gets. But for tier 7, it kind of feels like enough, and although 170 is not that spectacular, it actually has got that very solid 240 average damage to go with it. If you compare this with another tier 7 tank destroyer, which is in some ways quite similar. I mean, this is basically a medium tank hull with a different turret housing a larger gun. The British Challenger with the medium tank hull it has, that's got the same amount of penetration pretty much, but it has far less damage. So that 240 alpha, I think, is one of the reasons why this is actually a surprisingly comfortable machine to play. It does just feel like a somewhat sluggish medium tank in a lot of ways. So Red Star has got himself some pretty reasonable matchmaking. I think this is 357. Lots of tank destroyers on each team, and it's Durpenberg, so this might be a bit drawn out and campy. It really does depend on who does what, who blinks and tries to cross the river first. And in this case, of his own team, it looks like it's only the SU-152, although there might be one or two other tanks that try crossing over there. But most of the team is on this side of the river, and it looks like most of the enemy team is on that other side of the river, their side of the river. But even so, there's still, at this early juncture, we're only about 3 minutes in, now, 5 tanks dead on each team? So each team is a third down already. So it's a reasonably quick pace so far, but this can be one of those maps where things progressively drag out more the longer the match goes on, as the fewer the tanks there are suddenly start to get much more campy. I'm aware that was maybe not the most logical sentence I've ever said out loud, but this is me, compared to some of the stuff I'm sure that's come out of my mouth over the years. That was a positive, paragon of Vulcan logic or something, I don't know. Anyway, so there's a couple of tanks, enemy tanks, that have unwarily maybe pushed, well, we know there's one for sure, but surely this T-34-85M won't have done it alone. Although actually, it's kind of looking like they might have. The tank destroyers that were on the other side that we know were over there, the E-25, the IKV-90B, and who knows what else, they haven't been spotted, so maybe they were just letting this guy go forward and hoping that he would spot for them. Meanwhile, Red Star himself, I mean, he's been mostly taking the high ground and doing just that, shooting what his allies have been spotting, but he's trying to get a bit closer to the action on this side now, because a couple of his own teammates are maybe thinking about doing the same thing. Now, E25 has taken a good couple of hits. If E25 or the 12T could stay alive at this point, that would be pretty good, because having eyes on this map would be pretty useful, especially as things start to draw out a bit, because for all it's got some nice qualities, it doesn't have a great view range, the T25 too. But Red Star does have binoculars and a camo net, so in theory he could, if he sets up somewhere for an ambush, potentially outspot something. There is bad news, however, in that their Scorpion G decided to press across the bridge, and they have at least taken a tank with them, but it wasn't a great trade. It was their top tier tank destroyer for a T-34-85M. So at least they took something out with them, but they then got blatted by artillery in return. So, this is now come down to, as Durpenberg so often does, a bit of a stalemate. And this can be a really awkward situation to break out of, because you can sometimes get a situation where you have a seeming superiority and a bunch of people rush across the bridge and get slaughtered by defending tanks, but that's not really the case here. It's more that we've come down to basically the same number of tanks, and this is more devolved into a war of attrition at this point rather than a whole bunch of people dying all at once. Of the remaining enemy tanks, well, we've only seen 3 of them, so there's at least, what, 2 more tank destroyers and the artillery completely unspotted at this point, which is not great. The enemy E25 is still alive, which is not great, and of course the artillery could cause them a problem. And especially as of their remaining tanks, you know, not a lot of them have huge amounts of health left or huge amounts of armour. This wasn't a game with a lot of armour in it at all, so artillery might be particularly effective under these circumstances, especially as this is a 9:19 replay. The longer matches go on these days, the more effective artillery gets, because artillery these days more relies on getting splash damage, and it can more consistently get splash damage. So the T-34-100 has fallen victim to artillery. The E-25 has obviously pulled back from the last spotted position. You might be wondering about their own E-25, who hasn't moved in a while. We'll come to that. We'll come to that. This is Durpenberg, so you might have guessed what's happened to him. Meanwhile, his allies, remaining allies, have tried to push across, which is, it's like, well, if you want to try and win this, you've got to try something at this stage. It looks very much like the enemy tank destroyers, because it is all tank destroyers plus that artillery. They're not really inclined to go on the offensive. They seem much more inclined to turtle up and hope that Red Star's team do this. But there's enough terrain to use on this map that it's not a completely suicidal move if they do it right, and you know, if all of the enemy tank destroyers aren't just waiting for them in a line. But it's still risky, very risky, and it's costing them tanks. Now, the E-25 has taken out their artillery, so we know the E-25 is in fact on the other side of the river. So that's, you know, a point of information. We also know where, there we go, the 2 Swedish tank destroyers are, and the ARL was last spotted back here. Obviously what Red Star's hoping to do is come up from behind them, catch them unawares, put that good alpha damage to use, and hopefully turn the tide in their favour. He's also got a reasonable number of hit points left, but it's not like he could take a lot of hits. So there's the ARL, who was back here, and he actually gets a reasonably rare bounce. I say reasonably rare, you know, this thing isn't armoured pretty much at all, except apart from the gun mantlet. The gun mantlet can be quite troll. It's not exactly reliable armour, but you will sometimes get those bounces. So that's another nice feature of the T25 too. So that's 2 of the tank destroyers down. The E-25 spotted on the other side of the river, maybe lit up by their own E-25. Yeah, if you figured out by this point that he managed to slide down and get himself stuck without actually drowning, you would be entirely correct. So Red Star's come to join up with the Type 64, hoping to flush out this Swedish tank destroyer, but somehow they've managed to slip away. I'm not entirely sure how they managed it. They might have slipped over the ridge line without the Type 64 spotting them, and they must have, because they've managed to fall back to that position. So once again, a bounce, and hopefully, you know, one more shot will finish off this mouse droid, but it might end up having to be 2 shots. But the 65-2 is wisely falling back because he knows he doesn't have the hit points, and hoping that artillery will help him out, and artillery does actually manage to splash Red Star there. The Type 64 meanwhile has just decided to go for it, and I think was planning to, like, it's not entirely clear from this angle, but I think they were trying to side hug the IKV-65 and at least got 1 shot in, but clearly they were not able to stay away from the gun. That one shot they did get off, however, left the 65 a one shot for Red Star, so we've now come down to 2 versus 2, but really 1 versus 2, because their only 25 is very thoroughly stuck. He's not getting out of there short of drowning. So artillery, they're fairly sure is in this corner. He's obviously been paying attention to where shots have been landing, and so have his allies, because there's only so many directions that it could be, unless they'd retreated across the river at this point, but it doesn't seem like they have. Also, of course, there's still the enemy E25 to contend with, and yeah, that was him turning up right there, firing APCR, which is probably not surprising at this stage of the battle. Just, even if we assume that they've been firing AP throughout the battle, it can get through its ammo reserve so quickly that there's every chance that they started off firing AP and that they're now down to just the APCR. Or it could be one of those E25 drivers that exclusively has loaded APCR, you just don't know. So he knows the guy was probably going to try coming for him, but as it was, he then managed to ram himself into Red Star, and I'm not quite sure why they didn't get that final shot off. I thought they would have been loaded to try and get a final shot, but maybe Red Star's hit or even the ramming damage actually knocked out a crew member or damaged the ammo rack. Not entirely certain, but although that was very nearly fatal for Red Star, that nearly did for him, it didn't quite. RNGesus saved the day. He's now sitting with very little health, but he is still crucially alive. So there's the 2-minute warning. There's maybe, if someone was basically at the cap circle right now, there's I think enough time just to try and get this, but Red Star actually tries to go for the final kill. And then as a final plot twist, rather than let Red Star even get a chance of the final kill and a top gun, the artillery kills themselves against the side of the building. So, Scumbag of the Year award goes to... Well, actually, no, I'm sure there are artillery players who have behaved far worse than that out there, but still, that was a pretty low display. So that was an ace tanker, no Top Gun, but he did get a high caliber and a Confederate, 3,700 damage done, 1,367 base XP, quite clearly at the top of the team, because although... that was a fairly close, tense battle. You then look at the team list, and there were some of his teammates that really weren't that impressive overall. But yeah, that came down to being a really close, tense ending. And then there was that surprise twist of artillery being artillery. It's just almost a pity that arty player didn't have the good grace to either, actually try and shotgun Red Star. And then, okay, at that point, the best they could have managed would have been a draw, unless they somehow figured out a way to kill the stranded E25. And I don't think they knew that E25 was stranded. There was no indication the enemy team knew that E25 was stuck there. But instead, they took the jerk option and blew themselves up on the side of a building. They didn't even try to shotgun Red Star, as low health as he was. They just went for the screw you, I'm not giving you a Top Gun move instead. So, yeah, well done that player. So that's it for this replay, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.